The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Alrighty, folks. Hello and welcome to the Whitfield Report Monday edition. My guest for today is Mr. T.G. Brown, who is an author in the men's adventure fiction genre space, author of the Warren Lawson series, and I believe, T.G., you have a few other books as well, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah. Right behind me there, I wrote a Western called Cut Them Down. And then I have another book called Silence Thy Father. So Cut Them Down, like I said, the Western. Silence Thy Father is like a prison survival story.
Yeah, and that was actually the first one that popped up on Amazon when I typed in your name. So
Yep. It's my most recent one.
Very exciting. So anyway, welcome to the show and happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So just to start off, what is your general background and how did you get started first as a reader and then as a writer, or were you a reader of fiction beforehand?
No. So I definitely was a reader beforehand. I've been reading for most of my life. I grew up reading the Jack Reacher books and Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch series, of course, Louis L'Amour books. So many types of fiction, a lot of action adventure, a lot of mystery, a lot of crime. Crime definitely was something that drew me in a lot. Crime genres, whether it was from the criminal side of things or the law enforcement side of things, I was always intrigued by that. My background, I'm currently a police officer. I've been a police officer for 11 and a half years. I'm a sergeant right now in Oregon. And it's been busy. I've been a detective. I've been on the major crimes team. I've investigated various crimes from homicides to sexual assaults to human trafficking cases, drug trafficking cases. And that's, been my life for the last 11 or so years. I'm also a defensive tactics instructor. So I teach various martial arts for officers and civilians alike to be safe in a use of force incident. And I also teach verbal de-escalation skills, because majority of the time verbal de-escalation actually works in the real world. That's kind of your main weapon. So I try to teach that as well as the physical stuff as well. So yeah, that's my background in a nutshell.
Yeah, so that's actually interesting. I did not know that. I think maybe you had told me like in the Discord or something before that you were in law enforcement, but I didn't know, or I had forgotten. I've actually had a few authors who are also either, most of them are actually retired police officers. I don't know if you know who Andrew G. Nelson is, but he's another author in our space who was with the NYPD for decades, and he's retired now, but like talking to him about law enforcement has been fascinating as well. Has your role in law enforcement influenced your writing at all? I'm curious.
Absolutely. I'd say my Warren Lawson series, which is about a police officer investigating various crimes on a tribal reservation, definitely was influenced and inspired by some of my real life experiences. Although I write fiction, I try to write it as real as I can while it being entertaining. And so that's kind of where my Warren Lawson series is. My Warren Lawson series is very much a reflection of my experiences with, of course, the men's adventure aspect thrown in there.
Was writing something that you always wanted to do, or was it more of a reaction to, cop books are, BS, and since I'm a cop, I'll write one that's more realistic. I hear that a lot from, authors in our circle, and, so.
Yeah. No, good question. No, I always wanted to write. And at first I started, I mean, since I was a little kid, I loved writing stories. And then I grew older and I became a police officer, experienced things while on the job. And while I experienced those things, I was trying to find a way to um, get through the trauma mentally, right? You can't make sense of some things that happen to you. So I started journaling. And when I would journal these incidents, I would rewrite the endings of what I wish happened versus what really happened. And that was really cathartic for me. And
Yeah.
and so I did that for a while. And then after experiencing enough in this law enforcement field, and I always wanted to write my own fictional character, have a series out there. It was always something that I strove to do, but I was like, I don't know if I have enough life experience yet. So about 6 or 7 years into the job, I felt like, okay, I got a good base of things that I could write about now. And then that's where I started writing my first book, Tribal Honor. And Tribal Honor essentially, I mean, it is fiction, but a lot of what I put in Tribal Honor is like actually happened to me. And so it was really almost similar to my journaling exercises in a fictional adventure novel. So it was pretty interesting to write that. It was like the most cathartic book I've written. And so that was how my first book was birthed. And then from there on, I mean, I was like, well, I want to keep doing this, and what do I have to do to keep doing this? And so that's where I'm at now, and I'm just continually to write because I love writing. Writing is everything to me. I always tell people it's like breathing. That's how important it is to me. I cannot go a day without writing because the way it makes me feel. When someone reads your work and tells you they like, that feeling is just, to me, I can't recreate that in any other form.
Yeah, I totally what you mean about it feeling cathartic too. I mean, you know, I do freelance, writing kind of like technical stuff professionally, as a day job. But like I was also, involved in politics in a couple political organizations when I was, in college. You know, I write in the political thriller genre, but I do it in a way where where I'm kind of trying to include some of my, my experiences. I'm not trying to, bash people over the head with, anything or the ideology, but like, tell, a story that's fiction, right? But, you kind of have to fictionalize some stuff to keep it entertaining. But I think there are definite, elements that authors tend to include of themselves and of people around them, for sure.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of authors do that, right? A piece of them is in all their characters, is what some people say. And I would
Yeah,
say that's definitely true for some of my writing, for sure. A lot of people say that Warren Lawson and myself have a lot of similarities, and maybe they have similar traits, but Warren is kind of what I view as what I hoped I can become. You know what I mean? Like he's
yeah,
that type
yeah.
of officer that I mean, it's not who I am yet, but I hope I can be. And it's kind of like that character. A lot of fictional characters did that for me growing up. Was like, man, that character is so cool, fictional or not. I was like, I want to be like that. And so that's what led me to the career path that I'm on now. And that's what I hope my character does for people down the road.
So, yeah, I think that's really cool. We create the characters that we aspire to be. It's funny because one of the characters in my books is the President of the United States. And I didn't write him as a self-insert at all, but like fans who have read the book are like, "Oh, this is you, if you were president." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know about that, but it's up to audience interpretation, I guess, stuff like that." So, in regards to the Warren Lawson series and him being a detective who works with the tribes, is that something that is also based on your experiences then?
Yeah. So no, I don't look it. I am part Native American, and I do work for a tribal police department. So yeah, a lot of that was my own experiences. I realized how unique the tribal law enforcement aspect of things are comparatively to other police departments in the world. The section of the world that I'm in is a very special and kind of a cool and neat setting that I just felt like brought something fresh to a genre that has a lot of stories already to it. And
Yeah.
yes, so
Just kind of open, just kind of an open-ended question, I guess. What are the biggest, I guess, misconceptions about not just tribal police officers, but just tribal life, in general? I know that there's been a lot more exposure in recent years to the Native American tribes because of shows like Yellowstone and and whatnot. Even as someone who I live in Florida now. I grew up in Colorado, and one of my close childhood friends, he didn't live on a reservation. Because, he has ancestors who were part Native American, and he said that there are a lot more stereotypes than people would think in regards to Native Americans.
yeah, that's a great question. I think it really does depend on who you're talking to and what reservation they're at. I'd say the reservation that I'm at is very well off. We have a really good tribal council, which is essentially, like city council for any other political type parties. But
Yeah,
and we have a really good relationship with each other. Our law enforcement and the people of our town, we're like this. Like we've created such a good bond with each other. So life on the reservation is unique, because it is pretty remote. There's not a lot of things out there. DoorDash isn't driving to your house out there. It's just a different vibe. And that's I think where people kind of forget is that like there's a lot of easier places to live than most reservations. A lot of reservations, the struggle is real. Like the struggle for a lot of these people just trying to get by is definitely something I see every day. Whether it's
yeah,
a kid growing up in a poverty family and not really having a chance after that, or something else of that nature. But yeah, no, I'd say it just varies. Like I said, from place to place. I wouldn't know what it's like on a reservation in like Arizona, for example, because those reservations are massive, and there's a lot that goes on down there that doesn't happen up in the Pacific Northwest.
yeah. Where I don't want to dox your location. So if you're not comfortable, sharing where you're at, that's fine. But I, you know, are you all right if I ask where you're at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Oregon, so yeah, so up in the Pacific Northwest is where I'm at.
Uh-huh. So then, yeah, I imagine the environment, in Oregon and just, like anywhere, your environment kind of affects, your life as, anyone would. So, as would for anyone. So then, what would you say are the biggest, I guess, challenges in terms of law enforcement that you face?
Yeah, another really good question there. You know, mental health is a really big problem right now. I think that's definitely one of the biggest challenges is trying to find enough resources to help mentally ill
Yeah.
and homeless populations. I'd say day to day, that's definitely up there because it takes a lot of time to deal with someone who's having a mental health issue, right? A lot of the times officers don't have that time. In a realistic, I mean, we are dealing with other crimes, other calls coming in. We don't have enough resources. We're not mental health clinicians, so we're not going to be able to diagnose what's going on with somebody. So I would say that's probably up there with and then I would say right after that is drugs. There's a lot of drugs out there. That's always been the case, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I was gonna say that is unfortunately one of those stereotypes, specifically with Native American tribes. There was a lot of drug use and alcoholism, and then in Oregon, I know that outside of Portland, from what I've heard, Oregon is pretty normal. But then once you get into Portland, it's murky from what I've heard. To put it, you know,
Yeah, Oregon's an interesting place. If you ever read on like the political things that we've decided to do over the
yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. We decriminalized drugs for a while, and that was a crazy time to be a police officer. We for me, like I said, I've been a police officer since 2014. So, when I started, drugs were illegal, including marijuana. Like, everything was illegal. So we arrested people for that. And then we go from that to literally it's lesser than a traffic ticket. I mean, it was crazy to be like, oh wow, we don't arrest those people carrying the drugs now. And that was just a crazy time. There was a lot of crimes that came with that, because when you can get access to drugs and no repercussions, things tend to happen, unfortunately. And so, yeah, that was a
Yeah.
wild time.
I don't know if you can answer this, so I'll try and ask this. I'll try and phrase this. Do you think decriminalizing um all the drugs has fixed, some of these crimes problem? Because I have a lot of friends who are libertarians, and they have no law enforcement experience, but their whole theory is, well, if we just decriminalize all the drugs, then the crime rate will go down and it'll be great. And I'm like, well, I'm no expert, but based on what I can see, the number of reported crimes won't go down. But I definitely think that there's going to be an element of people that will commit crimes regardless of whether or not they're on drugs. And
Yeah.
I don't think eliminating drugs is going to eliminate crime. Is what I've told people. And I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, definitely. I mean, that is a totally heavy-ended question, but what I will say is that overdoses went up a lot, at least in my area, and I would say in a lot of areas that I know of around me. And it was pretty sad to see because there was no regulations on this thing. There are certain drugs out there that we should probably have regulations on, in my opinion, just based on what I've seen in my experiences,
yeah.
because those drugs are very unhealthy. Some of them make people downright delusional. I mean, sometimes those drugs will incite a schizophrenic break in somebody's head, and then they go off on a rampage because they're on drugs, and they're a totally different person when they're not on drugs. And so, to me, yeah, I would say that I see both sides of what Oregon was doing in that time, right? Which is, okay, they decriminalized drugs because the amount of drugs somebody was carrying, let's say like somebody had just like a gram of cocaine or something, instead of charging them with a felony, they wanted us to charge them with a violation, right? And so I can see one side of that as saying, hey, that's just a normal guy out partying, right? No big deal, we shouldn't charge him and ruin his life or whatever. And I can see that side of it. But there's a flip side of that, is that, okay, now we're endorsing that behavior, and where does that stop for that person? So I would say there is two sides to every story, and like most things in life, not everything's black and white. And so there are cases that I saw where it did work for people, and some people did get clean, and there was cases that I saw where people used that decriminalization law and ran it into the ground and were doing crazy things like snorting cocaine in front of cops in the parking lot. And you know what I mean? So yeah, there was definitely some weird things like that. And so yeah, so like I said, I'm not a politician for a reason. I just go out there and do whatever the law, I enforce whatever the law is, and that's all I can do. It's definitely it was a wild time to be alive, I'll say that.
Has your attitude about being a police officer, I mean, I guess it would change inevitably as you get, into the job more, but I guess, like, how has your attitude approached? As what I guess, has there been anything that's really surprised you in both the negative and positive ways? And then kind of tying that into your writing, have you tied any of those experiences into your writing then?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's a lot of experiences that I've tied into my writing, whether it's a case that really affected me or it's my just general emotions of the whirlwind that is this job. When you start out in this job, I would say you have a lot of hope. And then you kind of realize that it's not necessarily one person's not going to change everything. And when you start, you think you can save the world. You're young and you're hopeful and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that you just grow old and become cynical. I don't think that's necessarily it. I think you just become more of a realist. Like, okay, you take it by case basis, and you like the scale of what your mind was at the beginning just sharpens. Like, okay, I'm going to help this family and do the best that I can for that family in this particular thing. And then once I'm done with that, I will move on to the next thing, and that's so you definitely just get really good at shifting your focus. And so I would say that's where I changed the most. When I first started, I was trying to stop every crime in progress. I was trying to work way too much. I was neglecting everybody at my home life. And then as I got older, I was like, what am I doing this for if I don't make time for my loved ones? And so then I got better at balancing those two things.
Yeah, and I think in regards to like, mental health, what you were talking, like it's awesome that, you've found writing and it's cathartic, for you to be able to write, these books and whatnot. One thing I hear a lot of people talk about is, well, police officers and cops need to be more aware of mental health. And on the one hand, I think in general that could be true, but I think there's also kind of the flip side where it's like, well, all these quote unquote mental health experts also need to be aware that police officers are people too. They're not they're not robotic terminators, unlike what some people might think. But I've talked to a lot of police officers who they might not have mental health issues themselves, but they know police officers who do or
Mhm.
something. And I've heard that there's not as much awareness about, the mental health about the mental.
Yeah, no, I'd say that's true. I think in recent years we've definitely progressed in that way. I think when I first started, it was very much like if you talked about your feelings, you're a total wussy. And
Right.
then now I think it's more accepted where guys will go out of their way to be like after a bad call and be like, "Are you okay? Like, do you want to talk about it? I'm here if you want to talk about it." Things like that. Because I think the older generation who lived 30 years of this job without processing what they went through, they're paying for it later on, unfortunately, because now,
Yeah.
unfortunately, those things crawl back up in the back of your brain, and now you're left with them alone in retirement, and that's a really hard place to be mentally. And so now I feel like we've definitely taken steps to get better at that, finding healthy hobbies and things like that to help police officers survive this job. Because really, you don't really just serve in this job, you survive it, because there's so many ways of this job. There's so many things this job takes from you emotionally, physically, and all that. So you have to survive it, and you have to find ways to survive that and find good things that are healthy for you, because even though I love the job, it is very unhealthy. Like, this job is a lot of highs and lows, and it's not normal. Some of the things they ask a police officer to do is not normal. I mean, we're the jack of all trades but the master of none. You know what I mean? Is that, there's things that they
Yeah.
expect us to be masters of, but we're not. We're not, like I said, we're not mental health clinicians. So yeah, I'd say we're getting better, and I hope one day that my wife is also a therapist, and she specializes in like law enforcement mental health. We hope one day to present classes to law enforcement to help them with mental health one day. That's also in our radar. So
That's actually awesome that, that you have a wife that's, supportive that way.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, my wife and I actually met on the job. She used to ride with law enforcement. So she was part of what's called the Mobile Crisis Response Team. And so that team consists of an officer that's basically like a bodyguard for the therapist, and a therapist will ride with them in the patrol car. So they'll take calls, anything from a suicidal person to someone having a mental health episode, whatever it might be. She would get called to that. Anyway, so I met her on the job, and that's how we met. And in my first book, Tribal Honor, there's actually a scene where my main character meets his love interest in the same exact way that I met my wife, because it was a very unique way how I met my wife. It was hilarious. It was all these things, and I had to, yeah.
that's
So
awesome.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, so actually, the first book, my main character and the love interests, there are actual some real life things put in there to add some flavor to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as far as going back to like your interest, so was was becoming a cop something that you always wanted to do, or was it something that you thought later on down the line?
Yeah. No, there was a couple things I wanted to do in my life from a young age. And so one of them is I wanted to be a professional athlete. I wanted to be a police officer or a detective, either a detective or on a SWAT team, one of those two. And then I wanted to be an author. I wanted to write books. And so I ended up getting to be able to be a professional athlete. I actually wanted to be in the NFL. That didn't work out for me, but I ended up being a professional athlete in CrossFit. I'm still competing in the sport of CrossFit. And then I became a police officer. And then once I had those two things knocked down, I was like, all right, there's one more things I got to get done to have a full life. And then I started writing books. And so those were the three things that when I was very young, I was like, that's what I want to be in my life. Like that's what I want.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so do you have any uh other family members in law enforcement?
Yeah, no, actually I don't. I am the only one. Um and that was it was a pretty big surprise, but I just grew up watching these movies and these and reading these books about police officers and stuff, and I remember just thinking I want to do that. I want to be like that, and it's funny, how far a childhood dream can get you,
Yeah.
but that feeling never left my brain. I just constantly was like I want to do that, and I just did everything I could to accomplish it.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, being a writer is something that I always wanted to do, and also I wanted to be in, broadcasting too. And what's kind of ironic is around the time around the time when when I was finishing high school, I was looking at potentially going into casting. This was like back in 2012, 2013, around 2012, 2013. And someone at the local station who I knew actually said, well, radio is kind of dying because podcasting is really starting to take over. And, that was like 10 plus years ago. And now, you know, I guess podcasting kind of has taken over the medium. And then, as far as like being a writer's concerned, like I'd written, um, stories ever since I was a kid, too, but hadn't really, seriously considered like trying to find an agent. And then, like about 5 years ago, I finished college and was, just like, okay, I'm done with school. Now what? And the job market wasn't that good, so I was freelancing and doing that. And then in the meantime, I kind of dug up some of these manuscripts that I'd written, and I knew that some people were self-publishing, and I was like, well, I already self-published a podcast, so why not try and self-publish a book, and what do I have to lose? And so, yeah, so here
Yeah,
we are.
that's
It's
awesome.
it's wild. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I love hearing stories like that where people just take a dream and this just see it through to the end.
yeah, and I've also written a few. I'm not into I'm not a police officer, but I've actually written a few crime fiction stories myself. So I might have to send you a copy
Yeah, I would
of
love that.
my crime fiction anthology, because I'm always curious to know what law enforcement thinks of how accurate most books are
Yeah.
or whatnot.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that. No, please send it to me. I read your short story in the Western, a Veritas Western short story collection, and I absolutely loved it. I loved that Western you wrote. I actually, when I read that, I was like, man, it made me wish that I wrote a Western short story for that collection. I was like, man, that was so good. I was really moved by that ending. I thought that was a great.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'll have to send you Night of the Vigilante, because that short story was actually a chapter that I put in Night of the Vigilante, which is my Western military thriller. Not and I so I initially and I yeah, it's the same character. So when I was writing Night of the Vigilante, I'd written that short story as a chapter in the book initially. and then I kept reading it, and I'm sure you've run into this as like an author too, but sometimes like you'll write a chapter or you'll write a scene and you'll really like it, but it doesn't really fit well with, the flow of the story. This was one of those moments where I was like, man, I really like this I really like this particular chapter, but I just can't use it. So I kind of put it not in the discard pile, but maybe I'll use it in a future book. And then when the Veritas Western thing came, I was like, well, let me rework this a bit and submit it. And if it if it gets picked up, great. If not, no harm, no foul. So now you also got published in the Noir volume, right? So yeah. So what was that like? Well, I'm absolutely flattered, and I'll have to send you I'll have to send you Blood Ties, which is my like crime fiction cop, and then I'll have to send you Night of the Vigilante as well. I think the interesting thing about um short stories is obviously I like to write long form, but at least for me, like short stories gives me an idea. It gives me the chance to write something sometimes in just one go and not have to really think about it. And so, I guess another question I have is with all of the stuff you do in regards to, being in law enforcement and then CrossFit, how do you find the time to write, and what is your process? Yeah. Is there ever any downtime as like as like a cop, when you're on patrol, to write or, do anything? Because like I know in, sometimes, in TV shows and, movies, they'll have, cops doing stuff, in between patrol shifts or whatnot, or is that just like Hollywood where there's, right. Yeah. Yeah, my late uncle was a fire chief in Telluride, Colorado, and I met a few of his uh friends at his memorial who were cops. A few of them, said basically the higher you go in the department in either the fire or, police department, he said, the more meetings you have to attend to and the more bureaucracy you have to deal with that as well as as your rank elevates, I guess. So yeah, yeah. And being on the reservation, are there any I don't know if you even really could and answer this, but are is there anything specifically about like being a police officer on a reservation that would be different compared to just like you know a normal sheriff in like a town or something outside of like a reservation, if that makes sense? Yeah, 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 yeah. Do many Native Americans leave the reservation ever, like to live outside, or is it more like I've heard it's a lot like the Amish where they're given the option to leave, but a lot of them don't just because they feel tied to their community. Yeah. So, and I imagine, and I could be wrong, but I would imagine being, a a cop, on a reservation, it definitely makes, hunting for suspects for, crimes maybe a little bit easier because you don't have to go through a big, as big of a population, uh, sample to look for something. It's a lot more wow. Yeah, and I think that's interesting because kind of from an outsider's perspective, it's interesting to me that, the tribal police, at least in your, uh, area, are very much you know, out whereas outside, the the tribal lands, in the outside world. I mean, trust seems to ebb and flow like quite, it's not very consistent at all. I mean, just a few years ago there was a big push to, defund, the police in some of these, bigger areas. And everyone I've talked to, who has like a working brain thinks that totally defunding them is a bad idea, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. I definitely think maybe, police, maybe there are ways to, reform police departments, but I definitely think, at least from what I'm at least from what you're telling me, you working in a very specific area has its advantages, and maybe you might not have as many headaches as some of these bigger police departments have to deal with. Yeah. So is that what I guess uh to ask, I mean, what keeps you going on those stressful days? Have there ever been you're like, well, screw this, I kind of want to quit, or I'm not sure if how much longer I can do this. Yeah, yeah. Well, I've talked to a few military veterans, over the course of doing this show over the years, and they've said something, pretty similar to where, one of the reasons why a lot of the guys, re-enlist, particularly, you know, with the Iraq and Afghanistan war, was a lot of them, they wanted to go over and, serve their country, and they felt they were, doing something noble, and then they got over there and it wasn't what they expected. But also, once they got involved in combat, there was that there was that rush of, adrenaline, and they just got used to kind of being, you know, in that constant, mindset of anything could happen at any time. And then when they got back to, when they would, come out of a deployment and go back to civilian life, things would just be a little too dull for them. And so, definitely there was that aspect. And I imagine it might not be the same for, you know, all police officers, but I imagine there definitely is kind of that anticipation too of, something could happen. I don't imagine that job ever gets boring for you. Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that because I actually interviewed my childhood buddy of mine who I've been best friends with since middle school, and he grew up in a household that really wasn't that stable. And then about 10 years or so ago now, he started to get into mixed martial arts, and it really, more or less kind of changed his life, for lack of a better term. And he's a lot calmer and a lot more, he's not as angry at the world as he was, and he's definitely said it's helped him, just get more structure in his life, and also just be a better person as a whole. So very, very interesting. So well, as far as books go, what is your next, schedule of releases? Do you have anything in the pipeline so far that you're working on? Awesome. So, yeah, and then have you ever thought about like writing nonfiction at all at some point? Yeah, sure. Do any of your colleagues read or just read your books, and have you gotten any feedback from them? Yeah. Is there any I mean that's awesome. Is there any author who you feel has really nailed um the experience of being a police officer, that you can tell, like, who would who would be the most accurate thriller author if you had to, suggest one to an outsider? Yeah, yeah. I love the Bosch books. Connolly. I think the Amazon show also did a really good job too. But I wanted to ask your opinion because I didn't want to assume that you would say Conley. I mean, I'm kind of biased because I'm a huge fan of, the Bosch series. As much as as much as I might like to, live in LA at certain times, reading his stories are like, you know, well, man, LA has a gritty side too. So that's yeah. So anyway, oh man, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you at if they want to get in contact with you? Awesome. For the video audience too, that's also a great mic that you have there too. So yeah. So I don't know. Have you ever like done any podcasting yourself before or anything like that? Well, that's awesome. I for one appreciate it. Makes it makes it easier, editing stuff together when guests have like, a decent mic as opposed to someone just trying to use like the $20 Apple, you know, earphones that don't have a good mic. Anyway, man, well, I appreciate you coming on, and I would love to, help you promote your next book and your series if I can. So I really appreciate you coming on. Folks, we appreciate you for listening. Go check out TG's books, and I'll link all of his stuff in the description. Really appreciate you coming on, sir, and have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. So thanks for coming on, and yep, we'll see you down the line.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.